So we come for the second part of the middleweights. So we've got, again, I finished, it was June the 12th, 1915. Les Darcy, it was fights Mick King, not Mick Young. I said Mick Young, I was rushing it. Mick King, and he wins by KO in the 10th round over Mick King. And that was in Sydney, as they all were from here on. So every one of these titles were in Sydney apart from one, and that was in Melbourne with Mick King and Jem Smith. But this one's back. All the rest are in Sydney. So Les Darcy wins over Mick King in the 20th round, 20 rounds on points. Mick King is in Melbourne. And now we got May the 22nd, 1915. Les Darcy wins by disqualification in the second round against Jeff Smith in Melbourne. Sydney, surprise, surprise, as they all are from here on. July the 31st, 1915, Les Darcy wins in the 15th rounds. Referee stops the fight against Eddie Magooty in Sydney. Then September the 4th, 1915, Les Darcy wins over 20 rounds against Billy Murray from the US in Sydney. And then October the 9th, 1915, Les Darcy wins in the 6th round for retirement against Fred Dyer of England in Sydney. October the 23rd, 1915, Les Darcy wins on points over 20 rounds against Jimmy Clabby in Sydney. Then January the 15th, 1916, Les Darcy wins on points over 20 rounds against George K.O. Brown of the US in Sydney. Then May the 15th, 1916, Les Darcy wins in the 4th round by KO against Alex Kostica from Rome in Sydney. And September the 9th, 1916, Les Darcy September the 9th, 1916, Les Darcy wins over 20 rounds against Jimmy Clabby in Sydney. And then September the 30th, 1916, Les Darcy wins in the 9th round by KO over George Shipp in Sydney, Australia. Then Darcy went to America to pursue his claim of the championships, but died in Memphis on May the 27th, 1917. Yes, a bit like sort of Salvador Sanchez, died very young. But again, yeah, so one of them fighters, you never know how good he would have been. But here we go. So the world title, coming away from the Australian one now. So, yeah. So, yeah, the world title, April the 6th, 1914, Al McCoy wins in the 1st round by KO against George Shipp. That was in Brooklyn. So again, a little bit of readjustment here. So again, it's George Shipp there. Again, that's George Shipp, should I say. And yeah, we go, got it now. So we got November the 14th, 2017, Mike O'Dowd wins in the 6th round against Al McCoy by KO. That was in Brooklyn, New York. Then November the 6th, 1919, Mike O'Dowd wins in the second round against Billy Kramer of the US by a second round KO. March the 1st, 1920, Mike O'Dowd wins again by KO in the second round against Jack McCarran from the US in Philadelphia. And when Mike O'Dowd beat Billy Kramer, it was in Paterson, New Jersey. When Mike O'Dowd beat Al McCoy, it was in Brooklyn. And when Al McCoy beat George Chipp in the first round, it was in Brooklyn. So I missed them out. In March the 31st, 1920, Michael Dowd wins by KO in the fifth round against Joe Egan from the US. And that was in Boston, Massachusetts. Now May the 6th, 1920, Johnny Wilson wins over 12 rounds against Michael Dowd on points over 12 rounds over Michael Dowd in Boston, Massachusetts. Later on, Harry Greb would have to take Johnny Wilson to court to get him to fight him. That's another story. So March the 17th, 1921, Johnny Wilson wins on points over Mike O'Dowd over 15 rounds. That was in New York. And the divisions limit was now set at, should I say, 160 pounds. So we got July the 27th, 1921, Johnny Wilson wins by disqualification against Brian Downey from the US. On disqualification in the 7th round, Johnny Wilson wins against him in Cleveland, Ohio. So after this, the New York Commission declared it vacant. It was so controversial, this fight. And also Wilson was scaling 165, but wasn't in the limit, really. So again, it was declared vacant. We had Dave Rosenberg fight for this. So on August the 14th, 1922, Dave Rosenberg of the US wins on points over 15 rounds against Phil Krug from the US. On points over 15 rounds. That was in New York. That was for the vacant New York title. November the 30th, 1922, Michael Dowd wins in the 8th rounds by disqualification against Dave Rosenberg. That was in New York. Then March the 16th, 1923, O'Dowd retired, being knocked out in the first round of a non-title fight against Jock Malone in St. Paul. Harry Greb was universally recognised as the champion after his wins over Johnny Wilson and Brian Downey in 1923. So, August the 31st, 1923, Harry Greb wins against Johnny Wilson over 15 rounds in New York City. Harry Greb, there was never any film of him, but again, his record speaks for itself. Phenomenal record when you look at it. And again, so December the 3rd, 1923, Harry Greb wins on points over Brian Downey, the US, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Then January 18th, 1924, Harry Greb wins on points again against Johnny Wilson over 15 rounds in New York. 15 rounds points against Johnny Wilson. So March the 24th, 1924, Harry Greb wins by KO in the 12th round against Faye Kaiser from the US. In the 12th round, by KO against Faye Kaiser. And that was in Baltimore. The 2nd of July 1925, Harry Greb wins on points against the great Mickey Walker, the toy bulldog, over 15 rounds on points from the US. And that was in New York. Again, there was the famous folklore story about them having a straightener after, but again, some say not true, some, you know, horses for courses, whatever you want to believe. But again, it's a little bit of folklore surrounds it. So, June 26th, 1924, Harry Greb wins on points over 15 rounds against Ted Moore from England. And that also was in New York. And then the next one, we get the first coloured middleweight champion, black middleweight champion, Tiger Flowers. Because again, Harry Greb didn't avoid any fighters through the colour line like a lot of fighters did at this time. He didn't agree with that. But again, February 26th, 1926, Tiger Flowers wins on points over 15 rounds against Harry Greb. And that was also in New York. Then Mickey Walker wins. So again, that was August 19th, 1926. Tiger Flowers becomes the first black middleweight champion of the world when he wins on points over 15 rounds against Harry Greb. And that was in New York. And then December 3rd, 1926, Mickey Walker wins on points over 10 rounds against Tiger Flowers in Chicago, Illinois. June the 30th, 1927, Mickey Walker wins over 10 rounds and gets a KO over Tommy Milligan. Tommy Milligan from Scotland, and that was in London, England. June the 21st, 1928, Mickey Walker beats Ace Hudkins over 10 rounds on points from the US. Ace Hudkins, that was in Chicago, Illinois. Then he beats Ace Hudkins again. So again, October the 29th, 1929, Mickey Walker wins on points over Ace Hudkins over 10 rounds. This time in Los Angeles, over 10 rounds on points against Ace Hudkins from the US. So again, the division comes a bit chaotic, where Mickey, the toy bulldog, Mickey Walker, relinquishes his title, and again comes a bit sporadic. We got the NBA title, and we got an international IBU title kicking about. So let's go for the NBA title, which later come the WBA. 25th of January 1932, Gorilla Jones wins by KO on the 6th round against Odeon Piazza from Italy in Milwaukee for the vacant title. Then April the 29th, 1932, Gorilla Jones wins on points against Young Terry from US. That was in Trenton, New Jersey. The NBA withdrew its recognition from Jones after his loss to Marcel Phil. And then August the 9th, 1933, Lou Broulard from Canada wins by KO in the 7th round against Ben Jebby from New York. That was in New York for the NBA version. So let's go for the first IBU title fight, and then we leave it there. So again, June 11th, 1932, Marcel Phil wins in the 11th round by disqualification against Gorilla Jones. And Phil was recognised as the champion following his result, even though the NBA did not regard it as a championship defence by Jones. So again, we've got Marcel Field's reign next. Again, that was the end of the second part of the middleweight history of boxing. Bang.